This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 225 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's episode is about vegetarian and vegan travel. It's a topic that's pretty close to my heart. I don't actually talk about it that often, but I was brought up vegetarian and it's not very common that I eat meat. It's not never, but it's pretty unlikely. I certainly never cook meat at home. Honestly, I don't even know how to cook meat. It's a mystery to me because it's not been part of my life ever. And I tend to eat perhaps meat occasionally, often to be polite, which often tends to be when I'm traveling, when I'm, being offered something and I don't want to appear rude. It happens, but generally speaking, I do like to eat probably a 95% vegetarian diet. Not vegan, but vegetarian. But today I have a few guests who have interesting tales to tell about their experiences traveling as vegetarian and vegans. So it's interesting, even if you don't eat this way, I think, although it's a growing movement from a health perspective, which I think is fair enough. So my first guest today is Lindy Alexander. I was really glad to finally have Lindy on the podcast. I've known her for a couple of years and she's a fellow travel writer and just a delightful person and a fellow vegetarian. And she starts off by telling me about how she had spent a while back, something I didn't even know about her, spent 8 months in Uganda. And she explains what she was doing there and then tells me what it was like being a vegetarian living in a remote village in Uganda.
In my mid-20s, I volunteered with, now I don't know if this organisation exists anymore, but it was called Student Partnerships Worldwide, and it was the youth kind of arm of Australian Volunteers International. So I signed up to go and live and work and volunteer in a remote Ugandan village. And what really appealed to me was that I would be living and volunteering with other Ugandans as well as other international volunteers. Cool. So I went and I felt fairly prepared in that, well, as prepared as I could be, in terms of we had heaps of cultural sensitivity training and that kind of thing before we went. And I was placed with an English girl and a Ugandan guy. And Flip, the Ugandan guy, he lived in Jinja, which is, moderately big city in Uganda. He had all the mod cons, grew up watching kind of American TV, went to a great school. So for him, when he landed in this tiny little rural village with no running water and no electricity, he kind of had the biggest culture shock out of all of us because he almost saw a side to his country that he'd known about but had never visited before. So it was fascinating having conversations with him about what that was like. And our village was probably, as the crow flies, it wasn't that far from Jinja, but on Ugandan roads, which are more potholes than road. And, you kind of get on a bus and you say to them, like, what time is the bus going? And they say to you, at that time. And at that time means like when the bus is full. So, it could be in 5 minutes or it could be in 3 hours. And the journey probably was, I don't know, anywhere between 4 hours and 6 hours that we would be on the bus for. And people would be interested in us because this was 2005. There weren't too many foreigners in Uganda at that stage. And so people would be so interested in us and say to us, like, where are you living? And I would say to them, in Bubalunguti, which is the name of the village. And they would look at me and kind of like click their tongues and say, there's no such place.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So it was so tiny that they hadn't heard of it, and almost like, I don't know if you know that musical Brigadoon, which is about, like this magical Scottish village that appears every 100 years. But that's how the village felt to me. Like it would just kind of appear and nobody else knew about it really.
Oh, wow.
So we were placed there for 8 months with the idea that we would be working with local primary school kids and secondary school school kids mostly around health education, so sanitisation, HIV, education, because HIV at that stage was rife, and there were lots of myths, I guess, and misconceptions about how you contracted HIV. And so we were living in this tiny little village. Most of the houses around us were literally mud huts with thatch roofs. We were in like a brick house, but if you looked up, there were some rafters and corrugated iron roof. There was a dirt floor, no running water, no electricity. We had to go to a borehole and pump our water in jerry cans and carry them back. Wow. Our shower was kind of like, we called it the rocket, so it was like a corrugated iron kind of structure with a cloth curtain, and we had a tub that we'd glug the water into, and it was freezing cold water, and we'd just wash ourselves like that. And drop toilet. I think also one of the main experiences that I can remember is being hungry, and being so hungry, and that kind of hunger that seeps its way into your bones almost and gnaws at you. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and being so hungry. And I think that kind of experience mimicked what the kids in the village were like, and the adults, because there wasn't much food and there wasn't much money. And so I became obsessed in a way with food and what we were eating, or the lack of food in a way. And so it was a really restricted diet. So we would have rice, we'd have posho, which is like a maize flour that is added with water and cooked, and it kind of looks like mashed potato, and it doesn't taste anything like mashed potato. It's really kind of starchy and stodgy, and I guess it fills you up, but I'm not sure how nutritious it was. Beans, cabbage, cassava, so really kind of like heavy foods, I guess. And being vegetarian, I wasn't sure how that would go, but actually I think arriving in the village and being vegetarian, I think in some ways it was a relief for the villagers, because they were so welcoming to us and wanted to cook meals for us. But because I was vegetarian, and Nat, the English girl that was with us, she was vegan, meant that when they did cook for us, they didn't need to kill a goat, or they didn't need to kill a chicken. So actually I think it kind of took some of that pressure off them, because these were really very, very poor families that we were living amongst.
So it was actually easy to be vegetarian, because I was thinking, when you're going to tell me this story, I was thinking, wow, this is like the situation where you just have to eat whatever they come up with. And then as a vegetarian, that can sometimes lead to quite tricky situations. But it was quite the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I am one of those. I'm not like a militant vegetarian. I mean, I haven't eaten meat since my early 20s, but I had kind of mentally prepared myself thinking, if I am presented with something and I can't really get out of the situation, I probably will just eat it, I think. But yeah, thankfully I didn't have to. And while they were kind of confused by the idea of like, why would you choose not to eat meat? Like, meat is the greatest thing, and meat means that you're wealthy, and we thought white people were wealthy. So while it kind of caused lots of those conversations, they really accepted the fact that we chose not to eat meat. And I remember one day we were just sitting outside. We had kind of a little area outside our brick house, and always like the neighbourhood kids would come and play and talk to us. And it was really early in the morning, and we were sitting outside, and this girl from one of our classes came. And so she's in this bright pink dress, and she kind of came around the corner. And often in those rural villages, people call out, they say "Kordi," which means "Am I welcome?" So it's kind of like knocking on a door. And then you answer "Kalibu," which means you're welcome. And so we heard this little "Kordi" from around the corner, and she came and she knelt, because females in Uganda, it doesn't happen in the cities, but in those rural areas, they kneel as a greeting in front of you. And she had something in her hand, and so she knelt in front of us and kind of like unfurled her fingers, and inside her hand was this freshly laid egg. And so she gave it to us, and Flip, the Ugandan guy who was the volunteer, said to me, it's like they've given us their chicken, because families were big. These were families who had 5, 6, 7, 8 more kids, and these scrawny little chickens pecking in the dirt. it meant a lot if a family could have
Super
egg
valuable.
yeah, and then to give it to us, it was such a moving thing to receive that.
I like Lindy's explanation of being not a militant vegetarian. I think that describes me very well as well. And there have been times when I have, out of politeness sake, eaten meat that I really would rather have not eaten. I'm not sure if I've told this story on the podcast before, so forgive me if I have. But many years ago in Japan, I was taken out by some wonderful friends for a very special occasion. It was a public holiday in Japan for Marine Day, and we were going to a lovely hotel in Osaka to watch the special fireworks, where we could eat dinner and see the fireworks from this lovely restaurant. And we had a conversation earlier in the day, which I realised later it was connected to mad cow disease and meat. And I realised later, because of course my Japanese was pretty average and my friend's English was imperfect, what it meant was that later I was served up this amazing piece of, well, amazing to others, huge piece of steak while they were eating a seafood dish. And I much prefer seafood. But in any case, there'd been this miscommunication and I was served this piece of steak. We were there in a very formal restaurant. We were wearing yukata, so like a summer kimono. It was a very special occasion and I had to eat this meat. And I have to say I did not, I'm afraid, enjoy it. And then I didn't feel very well and I couldn't even eat dessert, which for me was real travesty. But that's just one of those situations where, you know, it would have been incredibly impolite for me to say, oh no, I can't eat this. And so I did. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it. And I would be more careful about those kind of conversations in the future. But it's just one of those things that happens sometimes. Now, my next guest today is Tasha Goldberg, and like me, Tasha was brought up vegetarian, and we actually had a much longer chat, and we found we had a lot in common about this. For example, our parents were basically told they were malnourishing us, but, you know, we turned out fine, so I think our parents did a good job after all. Now, back in episode 217, Tasha told us about the good friend she made in Senegal, and in this story, she tells me about being invited to eat at that friend's mother's house.
One day, her mother invited me to have lunch with them in their home. And so this was, you know, I had enjoyed, I don't know if you've been to Senegal, but the food of Senegal is amazing. They have, I don't know if I could pronounce everything like, you know, exactly, but there's a drink that's made from the juice of a hibiscus. It's called bisap, and it's incredibly delicious. And they have a strong tea, lots of yams and rice and fish, and really I enjoyed the cuisine a lot. So yes, I was raised vegetarian, and once I began traveling more, I became a flexible vegetarian so that I could enjoy when people were sharing things with me. So this is different than going to a restaurant. I didn't have the feeling like I wanted to like order off of the menu something wild because it was from that place. It was more something that I wanted to be able to stomach somebody sharing with me something that they prepared and then were offering to me. I wanted to be able to say yes and be respectful in that way. Mm-hmm. So I was in Dakar in Senegal, and we were, I went to this woman's mother's house, and so she prepared a very traditional, I think it's called jollof. It's a rice dish. And so the tradition is that you share. It's one big platter in the center, and it's a type of rice dish that was, prepared with all different kinds of like raisins and olives and whatever is, you can change it depending on what you have, I guess. Mm-hmm. But there was chicken. And I haven't had a lot of chicken in my life. And if I had, I think I probably was a little bit more comfortable with the lighter meat than the darker.
Mm-hmm. Same.
So in Dakar or in Senegal, I think the dark meat is a bit more prized. And so it became a little humorous because we were in this, sharing this big platter, and the auntie kept pushing the dark meat to me as, the guest of honor, you can have this. And then I kept being like, oh, no, you have, And so we were, circulating the rice and chicken, around in this, circle, trying to be, and eventually I just had to take some big bites. And it was just, it's not my thing. I don't really want to eat that, but I wanted to eat what she was giving me. There was like a point where I felt like the more respectful thing to do is to take a bite and eat it and enjoy it and compliment it rather than keep pushing it off. So that was one story. But I think that, you know, being a vegetarian is, for me now, I feel like this is how I maintain my own health and wellness exactly the way that I prefer when I'm home. And I cook and order food that aligns with me as far as my health, but also like my consumerism values or my political views. But I really, really value exchange. And I know that these ideals that we might have about what is good for us health-wise or good for the planet changes when you are visiting people that live in different kinds of parts of the world or in conditions. So the way that people prepare their food, especially when they're preparing what's local to them in their traditional preparations, is sometimes very, very foreign. But I really value the ability to share food. It's, you know, the word companion is like, has this Latin roots of being able to, with bread, you know, yeah. So being able to share food is part of one way of creating friendship. And so I really value that. And, you know, that has meant that I have tried some very unique dishes around the world.
Tasha went on to tell me about a really unique dish that she tried in Alaska, but that story is something I will save for a future episode. My final guest today is Brighde Reed from Vegan World Travel. So she has a lot of experience with travelling as a vegan and has lots of amazing tips on resources and apps for any of us who want to do maybe some travel planning and research on eating a more plant-based diet when we travel.
So I've been vegan for 10 years and traveling a lot through that time. And I would certainly say that it has become easier for me to travel as a vegan, particularly as just the word vegan has become more well known and understood. 10 years ago in France, for example, the word vegan wasn't really a known word. And now many people know about it. So it's certainly become a lot more known and a lot more understood. And I think veganism is, generally speaking, amongst certain groups of people, it's certainly becoming more popular. And people, establishments, whether they are vegan or not, we are seeing the rise of the vegan hotel, which is a very interesting development in the industry. But also we are seeing more hotels becoming more vegan friendly. Which of course is great. However, I do have some tips to share regarding vegan travel. I think most vegans are very, very familiar with many of these tips already, but maybe there are some new vegans listening or some people that are thinking about it or just maybe looking to incorporate more vegan meals into their diet, especially when they're traveling. So the first thing is there's a really fantastic app called Happy Cow. And this is an online database. It's a website, it's an app. And basically it shows all of the vegan, vegetarian, veg-friendly restaurants in the world, including they also have, you know, special categories for like vegan grocery stores or ice cream place or catering, basically all of those kinds of things. So this, of course, is a really important app to have on your phone because, you know, you can be on the road and you can open it up and you can realize that, there's a restaurant with veg options just 200 meters down the road. So that's a really good one to know. There can often be really good apps specific to the country that you're going to. So it's worth checking those out as well. One is called, for example, in France, they have Veggie Resto, which is an app. And because it's French, it might have some listings on there that you might not have on Happy Cow. Billion Veg as well, I believe it is. It's not an app I have used very much, but basically it's trying to show, I'm sure it hasn't covered the whole world yet, but it's trying to show all of the vegan dishes in each restaurant around the world. So obviously this is something crowdsourced. So, I can go to a non-vegan restaurant and I can order a vegan thing and I can put that on the site so that when people go there next time that use the app, they will know that that's available. Awesome. So these are the kinds of apps that are really helpful. Another thing is to make sure that you let hotels know ahead of time. They will often make some sort of accommodation for you. Maybe they will get some soy milk in for you or some products. This can be particularly effective when you're staying in bed and breakfasts. There's some really great products, like there's a thing called a vegan passport, which you can buy quite cheaply, or you can find these guides online, and they're little sort of printable PDFs that you can carry and you can use to show wait staff and explain what you do eat and what you don't eat. Another app that can be really helpful is Veg Visits. Veg Visits is like Airbnb except for vegans and vegetarians, so that you can be staying in someone's house where maybe they have some gadgets in the kitchen that might be interesting for vegans, and also can allow you to stay with vegans as well. Another really fantastic one to meet up with people, other vegans, when you're traveling, is the app Meetup. There are meetups for every possible thing, including often vegan meetups. So you never know, there might be some meetups happening on the day that you are during the time that you are visiting. Yeah, there's even an app called Air Vegan, which kind of is a database of all of the vegan and vegan-friendly restaurants in airports.
Right.
So that can be a handy one as well.
Oh, that's awesome. What an awesome list.
So there's some great resources there, and I think it goes to the point that eating vegan or vegetarian is just so much more common these days. I remember when I first would take part in media trips, I would never say that I was vegetarian because I hated, being made a fuss of, and I was usually then the only vegetarian in a group of media, and I didn't want to, be the one who caused an issue. But these days, if I go on a trip with a group of people, it's quite likely that kind of often up to half of the people in a group will be vegetarian or vegan or have some other dietary requirement. And so I don't feel so bad about it anymore. It seems much more common, and therefore I don't mind, I don't know. I always feel like I cause a bit of problem if I'm too different, so I'd rather not. But these days I do generally say, tick the box that says, yes, vegetarian. And now the only time that I had a problem with this, and something that's always I've thought about it for many years, when I travel by plane, I usually always have said vegetarian because, it's a clear option. But I remember one time I was traveling domestically in Australia, and it was a short flight with just a snack. And the cabin crew were bringing around afternoon tea, and you could smell it. It was amazing. There was these beautiful choc chip cookies. But then they got to me, and they'd seen my vegetarian food request, and they pulled out a lettuce sandwich. And I, took it and ate it. But I did ask them as they went back later, have you got any more of those cookies? Because it seemed a terrible misconception to me that just because I was vegetarian, they assumed that I was also super healthy and I wouldn't enjoy a beautiful fresh choc chip cookie, because I definitely do enjoy that. So, sometimes people make the assumption that a vegetarian is a healthy person, whereas they maybe just don't eat meat. I'm going to try to be healthy as well, but, give me the choc chip cookie. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to episode 225 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A huge shout out, as usual, to my guests. Big thanks to Lindy Alexander. You can find more about Lindy and her work at The Freelancer's Year, which is at thefreelancersyear.com. It's all about giving practical advice for freelance writers and how they can earn good money, because she's a really successful freelance writer, but also really generous with her information and tips. So if you've got an interest in writing, go and check out Lindy's site. Also, a huge thanks to Tasha Goldberg, and you can find out more about Tasha and her project Evidence of Hope at evidenceofhope.com. And of course, thank you very much to Brighde Reed of World Vegan Travel, and you can find out all of her ideas and helpful tips and resources at worldvegantravel.com. Of course, come and join us if you haven't already in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group. We're well over 1,100 members there now, and we have such great conversations. Especially this year, I'm posting more regularly and posting some thoughts every day for Thoughtful Travel Daily. So come and join us there. There's a link in the show notes. The show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/225. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.